And here we are once again, Risky Business. I'm your host, Bryan Hattingh, with you, and with me, of course, is Jonathan Shaw. Jono, good evening.
Hey, Bryan, how's it going? Very good evening to you too, and looking forward to another great show today.
Indeed. And it's such a pertinent song, that Bridge Over Troubled Water, because firstly, it's a wonderful song that speaks about, the issues of comfort, support, and unconditional love during difficult times. It conveys a message of reassurance and solace, emphasizing the importance of being there for someone in need, sort of looks to things of compassion and support, resilience. It conveys a sense of hope and suggesting that even in the darkest moments, there is a way through pain and hardship, with the help of others. And of course, the quintessential, in turn, unconditional love. It's a source of strength that embodies the value of companionship and being present for someone, regardless of the circumstances or your own circumstances. And ultimately speaks to healing and comfort, And when you look at the times we're in, and ironically, we've seen these incredible floods in the Eastern Cape. I have friends of mine send me pictures of Fancourt golf course, one of the holes completely underwater. The bowling green in Port Alfred is now like almost a swimming pool, and rivers bursting their banks. And it's once again, whether it's El Nino or one of his friends that are playing havoc with us,
Yes. Well, it's been a very uncharacteristically wet winter, and for me it just switched. The entire feeling just switched this week. And yes, speaking of seeing all the floods and disasters, our little holiday neighborhood, Plettenberg Bay, was hit also incredibly hard. And I saw pictures of the golf course where the green had literally lifted off of the course and was floating away in this torrent of water.
Oh, my word.
And then, of course, it reshapes the entire beach area. So by the time you go back again, it's not at all like you remember it from your previous holiday trip. I always remember my dad saying that the houses that are on the hill actually have mooring rights. In other words, they could dock a boat if they wanted to. And they were nowhere near the water. So maybe it's moved enough for them to put their rights to good use. So yeah, quite a funny one, that.
Goodness me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so you think about and my heart goes out to the people whose homes have been wrecked and devastated by that, and even more so those very fragile individuals who live in sort of informal settlements and areas that could easily have had their homes completely washed away with what few possessions they have. So it is troubled waters and troubled times that people are having to manage through, over and above all the normal day-to-day issues and concerns of everything from new legislations around business and we see the ongoing war in Iran and the challenges that are taking place there and the impacts on fuel prices. We've just seen a big hike in fuel price, and particularly diesel, and people are saying, how do we cope, and costs of travel, costs of Uber, costs of a whole lot of things just going up. And the question gets sort of raised of how do you navigate, excuse the pun, in these times of troubled waters. How do you sail down this river of uncertainty and craziness? And it's one of those days for some reflection and conversation, and it causes us to pause and reflect about what is really, really of importance. What's of importance in our lives and for our lives. And it's so interesting. I've been following some on social media, some sort of frequency of posts, and some beautiful ones, I must say. I make a point of of following things that one, are of real interest, and two, of encouragement and upliftment, and so that can range from some great music and unknown artists that are emerging, and which I always love, as I would do, given my passion, as you know, for music and for rock and roll particularly, but not confined to rock and roll, to wonderful philosophical perspectives on really raising children beautifully, little cartoons and anecdotes that come with them, and they've been very uplifting. And so, as you go through all of this, and you look at the noise that there is on social media, and as you know, depending on what you follow and what you click on most frequently, that's the stuff you're going to get fed. So you can choose your own kaleidoscope of richness and color, or darkness and noise, so and you ultimately are responsible for a large part of that and the content you receive. So by getting to follow on subject matter that's really valuable and interesting, it's quite amazing to see what a volume of stuff comes your way, and how you can be inspired and even at times moved to tears by some of the wonderful stories and shows. I watch a lot of The Voice and
right. Whoopi
and
Goldberg.
Things like that, because
or are you talking about the singing one?
The singing one,
yes.
No, the singing one, and I love these instances of people who are unknowns, who have this incredible talent and suddenly come onto the stage. And I love watching the emotions and faces of the judges as they discover this and turn their chairs, and how these people of different ages, but particularly younger people, who are just, diamonds in the rough waiting to be discovered. And I love those success stories and those life stories that come from that. And so the question is, what do you focus on? And it's not only what are you clicking on in social media, but what are you focusing on inside of your head? What are the trips that you're taking into the mystic? The mystic world of reflection and consideration, and looking to see what is really of relevance and importance out there, that one needs to think about, and it's whether it be spiritual exploration, or whether it be connection with nature, or whether it's personal transformation, or just a journey of the soul. What are those roads and paths that you're walking down, and what are you expecting to get out of them, and what are you prepared to put into them, and how much of the noise in your world is blocking that out? How much of the noise in your world and the demands of the day, and all the little things that come into your space with the banner urgent being held up high? This is urgent, that's urgent, that's urgent. Oh, I must, I've got to. And you end up in a place of churn, and getting to the end of the day exhausted. And if you do take the time to reflect, and even more likely to, or less likely to journal, but if you were to journal and say, well, what did today bring? How was today? How did I show up? Did I like the way I showed up? Who's this person that I've got charge of? You've got this child that, i.e. you, that you've taken this far through life, at whatever point in life you're at. How well have you looked after that child? How well have you raised that child? How well have you guided it and directed it and nurtured it? And are you taking time to nurture it now? And that child had expectations, dreams, aspirations. How have those been realized or met, or not at all? Or have they been overachieved? And what sort of marks do you give yourself, and any gold stars or silver stars along the way? And you've got the opportunity each and every day to start it all a little bit differently. You can't clean the slate. You can't go back and change what didn't happen or did happen, what you could have done and didn't do. a lot of people might regret what they've done when you got to start thinking about how many things you could regret not having gotten to or gotten, and why not? And why not now? Why not? Oh no, it's too late. Oh, time's moved on. Oh no, I'm now too old for that. I couldn't do that. Nonsense. You're never too old. Now's a great time to actually. Now's the appointed time to be significant, even if it's only to yourself. It doesn't have to be to the world. You don't have to be held up in lights. Hold yourself up in front of your own lights, and how do you stack up?
Yeah. Well, I always feel, with regards to the social media thing and the way that the algorithm prompts you stuff, I foresee, or I don't know, maybe this is something that's happening, that some therapist or psychologist will eventually look at your stream of content that you're receiving and say, look, this is a little bit on the dark side, and maybe you should have figured this out or seen that, or how are you feeling about this, and why are you dwelling on this? And I can easily see that that it might be analyzed by AI, and you can then get feedback about the types of content that you're receiving, and what that might tell one about the way that you are looking at life in some ways. I always thought that would be an interesting concept if somebody had to analyze your social media stream, or even just your WhatsApps, and be able to say, okay, you're continually using this type of language, which reinforces X, Y, and Z about how you may act. But I mean, interestingly, that you've touched on reflection. My world has been involved in critical reflection for the last 9 months or so, since doing the PhD, and I've dived into critical reflection quite heavily, trying to figure out certain things. And maybe you've got some advice there, but a lot of it is about uncovering what they would call sort of like hidden power relationships or assumptions or things or biases that you weren't necessarily aware of at that particular time. And I've been constantly asking myself, reading through interviews with my interviewees for my PhD, and as well as looking at my work and so on, and trying to ask myself, well, where is the problem? What is it that I'm actually trying to uncover, and how do I see a problem if I don't know it exists? And so I've spent a long time trying to uncover biases, and ultimately what that led me to was the examination of ethics and what ethics means to me and how I might apply ethics in what I do, trying to sort of figure out what the correct course of action, so to speak, is. And that was one of the sort of major kind of things that came out of it at the end of the day. I learned a very new word that I hadn't heard before, which is axiology, which refers to values.
Yeah.
Values. So what is valuable and what is meaningful to you? Then aesthetics. What does it mean to have beauty, or to understand, or to appreciate something? And then there's the ethical component of that, and that's a philosophical term called axiology. And I didn't know about that until I'd done all of this research and started to dig a bit more, and of course trying to apply this to what I was studying. So how does that allow us to be more critical, to say what is the value of this that in this work that we're doing, and ultimately it's meant to uncover things like hidden biases. So the typical one would be the way that you're treating somebody is bad. You've got to recognize that how you're treating them is a bit of a problem. And so, that's my journey into reflection, to be able to look at your actions and your thoughts and your feelings, and then try and just talk about them to uncover them, and ultimately talk about what action you're going to take with this now new information that you have about the problems or issues, or I don't know what you would want to call them exactly, but you're uncovering those things for yourself and trying to act upon them. So it's very interesting that you've also talking about that particular route of reflection. What are your thoughts on all of that I've
So
spelt out
I
here.
love what you're sharing with me. Love what you're sharing with me there, because it brings a lot of things to mind. So, for example, touching on the point of ethics, I hold the view that true ethics are principles in action.
Yeah.
They're not just the principles. You
Yeah.
see, one can be very principled and not live by it. So you can have
Yes.
these very strong principles that you propagate and that you express, but are you living them when nobody's watching you?
Yeah.
Are you things that you consistently live out regardless of the situation? Not just in times of comfort and complacency, a la Martin Luther King Jr., but in times of controversy and challenge. Are you doing that? And what are these principles? Are these principles things that you inherited? Are these things that have just emerged through nurture nature, and that you've taken on without really interrogating them and considering them as to why they actually are things that you would hold dear? And I think one of the things that one can try to do, and it's a little bit sort of, in a way, paradoxical, is to say, in these reflections, to try and depersonalize yourself from them. And what I mean by that is you wanting to. There's a lovely technique in neurolinguistic programming called perceptual positioning, which gets you to step into the other person's shoes. So in fact, not only to the other person's shoes from an empathy point of view, but even the third person, which is an observer, the shoes of somebody, or looking through the lenses of somebody who's observing you and the other subject in the equation. Virtual or real, and to start thinking about the frame of reference that you have for the views that you hold and the passions that you foster and how you live your life, because it's so easy to just get caught up in the doing of life rather than the being alive in the life. How alive are you? And it sort of speaks to, and it leads up, in fact, to our next little music break, which is, that point I made earlier about stepping into the mystic. Step into the mystic, step into that space of reflection and deep reflection, and wondering what really is of consequence. And in the bigger scheme of things, it's for many people, the only time you really appreciate something is when you no longer have it. And we take so many things for granted. And I think it's so important that we develop this practice of reflection, because reflection goes far deeper than just thinking.
Yes.
People don't even have time to think these days, but to really reflect and to really deeply cogitate on what's of consequence, reflecting and looking how we can empathize and truly just show up differently in a world that's so, at the moment, wanting to take, wanting to polarize, wanting to position, wanting to externalize and point fingers and blame and criticize. And it's at the same time an opportunity for people to really show character of caring and empathy, and saying, no, we're not going to be swallowed up by this wave of dysfunction. We're actually going to be beacons of light, being the lighthouse that helps ships through the storms, and helps them find their way into port. We never quite know what other people are going through, and how just in a moment of consideration and awareness of services being rendered to us in a restaurant, for example, being courteous to the waitrons and asking them their names, and being treating people on an equal footing. This idea that I'm more important than you, that my stuff's more important than you. I've got this really important meeting, I've got this XYZ, and we all think that, wow, the world should stop and step back and, let us stride through and stride in. It's time for us to take out the brasso or the silver and polish up these little trinkets that we've developed in our lives of personality traits and ideologies and ethics and principles, and make sure that they shiny and new. Jono, your thoughts on ethics and
ideology is an interesting one because it differs so much for different people around the world. A lot of my studies have led into to being able to evaluate these types of things as they're happening to you. So motivation plays a big part of it. The one type of ethic that we're generally familiar with is what they call deontology. Now, deontology is old Greek word that refers back to duty. So in other words, it's our duty to do certain things. And this, of course, leads to things like the law. So we can't trust people to be naturally virtuous, because virtuous is another type of ethic. But deontology speaks about putting rules in place that force people to do the right thing regardless of the circumstance. So whether it's, traffic violations or, don't park here, you have to park there, or simply just a zebra crossing to cross the road is there because people were stupid enough to pop across at any point in time, and cars would hit them. And that's why we have those kinds of rules in place, is to try and protect society in that way. And the other type of ethic is of consequence. So it's the reason for not doing something. And again, there's laws against going out and killing people and so on. And of course, that's there so that we all play a role in staying away from those things. But our underlying motivations should ultimately be virtuous. In other words, you're not going to do these things because that's the right thing to do, depending on the circumstance. And so those are the three types of ethics that one needs to go through to judge their particular actions. And I'll tell you an interesting sort of story that I caught myself thinking about. Now, this is nothing to do with my research, but I went to class. I do kendo, which is the Japanese sword fighting, and we changed venue at one particular time of the week. And I had my cell phone out in the one venue, and we had changed venue, and we were going through the whole ropes. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, where's my cell phone? I've left it in the other venue. And I just literally got up and I stormed out of there to go and find my phone, because that was what was critical to me. And when I got back and sort of resumed my position, and the sensei came around and said, you left your sword on the ground. That's not something you should do. And I remember saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I was really worried about my phone. And the first thing that clicked into my head was that a valid excuse? That I neglected my duties in that space and time to go and rescue what was important to me, because I was worried about the phone getting stolen in the gym, right? And of course, it can be a concern. And it was something that stuck with me, because I'd never used those kinds of things as excuses for not to follow the rules in the past. There was always a protocol, and I don't know why that stuck out to me so much, but it was just an interesting circumstance that made me reflect on why I had carried out and done the things in the way. And it's a poor excuse to suddenly just say, well, I'm going to do this because it matters so much to me, even though it was not really that important at the end of the day. So, just interesting.
And reflecting on what you're saying, there's another side to this, which is the apparent defibrination of social order, in that you had to be worried about somebody having stolen your phone, and that would be a strong likelihood, whereas in certain times gone by, it would be fine. depending on space and location. I mean, there've always been bad guys around, but I think the disproportionate amount of inappropriate behavior around taking possession of other people's properties simply because somebody left it lying around, people feel it's their inordinate right to actually now take ownership of it.
Yeah, there's no consequence. They can just steal it, and they feel there's no repercussion that may happen about it. But a virtuous person would say, I found this 100 Rand note. I must hand it in somewhere. And you hope that the front desk doesn't acquire it in a similar manner. And it's so amazing when a wallet gets passed back to somebody and says, here's all your money. It was found, and you're just amazed that it's still there. And that's virtue, if that happens.
Well, if the announcement from the front desk would be, somebody has lost 100 Rand note. Will the owner please queue up outside?
Yes. Yes. What do you do in there? What do you do then? Yes.
Please, would you identify the numbering on that 100 Rand note, please, so that you can take possession of it back. But I think that it speaks to such an opportunity in the times that we live in to distinguish ourselves, to be conspicuous by excellence, to actually set an example that other people look to and say, gosh, you know what? I'd like to be like that. I'd like to do that, Wow. Yeah. Because people have become so desensitized and so sort of stereotyped around, this is the norm, and it's horrible, and it's a bad and ugly world out there. When in fact, there's so much good in the world. There's so many really great people, and they don't necessarily have to be people of status or of position or of power or of publicity. They're just really good people who live a life well lived, and have a concern for other people. And it so often plays out in situations in life and in the world where a misfortune occurs, and individuals who don't even know them rally to help them and even put their lives at risk. There was a fellow who recently tragically died, who drove over Chapman's Peak Drive, and according to reports, he had a blowout.
Wow.
and the car went over the cliff.
Sure.
And some young guy climbed down on these precarious rocks. I mean, put his whole life at risk to go and see if he could help the driver of the vehicle, who sadly had passed away. But, individuals who just, in that moment, just step up to the plate. And so many heroes emerge in situations of trial and tribulation. And why does it have to wait for that? Why can't we be living lives of consideration and of courtesy? I mean, if we just had chivalry and courtesy on the roads, imagine how much better things would be, how fewer accidents there would be, how less, a smaller number of pedestrians would be killed. We have shocking road accident statistics, and a large part of it is, I'm wanting to get there quicker. And let's not even get into talking about the various groups of drivers, and they're very obvious, who just will perform, road ordinance violations multiple times a day, maybe multiple times an hour.
Yes.
It's not even about, oh, well, the traffic light had just turned red. It was, no, that traffic light's been red for a long time. In fact, it's been red for so long, it's probably almost about to go green. And oh dear, here comes somebody who just goes trundling through it, and it's, come on, guys, isn't it time that we just stop for a minute and stop being so selfish? And that stems from leadership. It stems from leadership. It's in the same way as children, we don't inform children, we form them. We form them by the example we set to them and the impact we have on their lives. And if what we say matches what we do, they will internalize it. If it doesn't, they'll discard it. And in time, they'll come to disrespect us because we say one thing, we do another. How do they shape or model themselves? And in the world of life, many of the adults are just little people in big people's bodies who are looking for somebody to take a firm stand of leadership, to show them the way and how to behave and how to comport themselves. And that's what mentorship is all about. Forget it, put coaching to the side. Mentorship is about that, is about, transferring those insights, those skills, people shadowing you and looking to see how it's done, and to learn from the master, the Jedi master. Let's go and
Yes.
learn the tricks of the trade. And so, we need to become a society or a set of societies that really set great example. And unfortunately, as we look around the world right now, there's so much chaos and there's so much polarization and there's so much, resentment and more than resentment, antagonism and hostility from one group to another. And what's it serving you, and how does that enrich you, and how does that make you feel that you've actualized your life? Is that, imagine if you died in this moment, is that the way you'd want to die? Angry, bitter, toxic. How does that set you up for what's next? Let's assume, there's a group of people who believe that when you die, it's all over and that's done and dusted. But for those many, many millions and millions of people who believe there is a life after death, and they're, that you're going on to another life, what sort of, pass rate do you want? I mean, what sort of preparation do you need to have? I mean, what are the qualifiers that get you into the right side of the stadium?
One thought here is that, is it because you're worried about the consequence of what's going to happen once you've crossed over, or is the other side rather looking to see whether you actually landed up, internalizing and being virtuous about how you approached those things? Because if you're just scared of what's coming, that doesn't make, you're just doing it because you're worried that something bad is going to happen to you, right? Whereas if you truly looked back and reflected, you would try and say, well, what is the right thing to do in this moment? How should one act? And I mean, it's so hard to do this without being hoity-toity. Who makes us the ones to decide about what is right and wrong? And you start playing God in all of this, and that's where the problem of ethics sort of comes into it, is because what is the objective standard here that we're trying to uncover? That's quite a hard question. Who sets the rules, and how do we, by what bar do we measure ourselves, in what we're trying to make right with the world, so to speak?
So here's a lovely little story just to lighten it up. A certain gentleman was asked to give a talk at one of the business schools on business ethics. And so he got up and he said, what can I tell you about business ethics? He said, so imagine I've got this little shop, this little gift shop. And a lady comes into the shop to buy a gift, and it's a little gift, and she buys it for 200 Rand. And I wrap it nicely with a ribbon and a bow, still for 200 Rand. And she pays me in cash. She gives me a brand crispy 200 Rand note. Unbeknown to her, she's actually given me two, because they're brand new and they stuck together, right. You see? So in fact, she has paid me 400 Rand for a 200 Rand gift, even though it's nicely wrapped with a ribbon and a bow. And this is where business ethics comes in. Do I tell my partner? So yes, who said something? I forget who it was. It was very funny. His thing was, listen, I've got a whole lot of ethics. Which one would you like? You can choose. But I think it's really comes down to, I think we're getting there, of saying it's about intentionality. What is the intention of the heart? What's my intention in this here? And is the intention one of take, one of gratification, one of increase and for me and how what am I going to get out of this? Or is my intention, how do I make this world a better place? What is the world asking of me right now? What's life asking of me right now? And what are our grandchildren?
Yeah.
The world of our grandchildren asking of us right now.
There's a consequence waiting.
If we were to be standing in front of our grandchildren in 10 years' time or however many years' time, and they were interrogating us on the world that we had left for them, how would we answer that? What did we do to improve or better, or on the contra of that, to diminish or depreciate the world that we left them? And that speaks to the business that we do. Do we, in and through our production and manufacturing, pollute our rivers, pollute our land, cause toxic waste that we just don't worry about? What about all the plastic pollution into the seas and what we're doing? Have you stopped to think about what world are we leaving behind us? And that's where it comes in and saying, we can so easily say, oh, it's too big a deal. What difference am I going to make? And I don't know if you remember the Starfish Foundation. It was a foundation that raised funds for orphaned children around the world. And they built institutions and nursery schools and that sort of thing, and orphanages. And there was an ad that for the Starfish Foundation, and it was in black and white. It was, this old fisherman was walking onto the beach, and there was this beautiful young girl in this flowing dress, and the beach was strewn with starfish, and she was picking these starfish up and throwing them into the sea. And the fisherman walked up to her and said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, I'm saving these starfish." And he said, "But with all these starfish on the beach, how do you think you're going to make a difference?" And she picked up a starfish, and as she threw it into the sea, she said, "I made a difference to that one."
Yeah, exactly.
"I made a difference to that one." Because you see, you don't know who's in the room. You don't know whose life you're going to materially affect and impact. You don't know whose life you're going to inspire, that through your kindness, your generosity, your sacrifice is moved in such a way that they fashion their life differently, that it was an inflection point for them to choose right instead of wrong, left instead of right, whichever it is, and to walk a different road and walk a different path. And that the beauty of that is that we can at any point in time completely redirect our lives and the path that we walk down in such a way that we really distance ourselves from where we were going to be. I've often used the example of, imagine you were on an airplane flying, if you could, without a fuel stop, from Heathrow Airport to Sydney in Australia. Long way, long flight. And in leaving Heathrow Airport to fly to Sydney, unbeknownst, you are 1 degree off course, just 1 degree off course. So as you fly over the English Channel, it's not going to make a material difference to you. In fact, you won't notice it at all. But when you get to where you think you should be, if you haven't looked around, where Sydney should be, you'll discover after that length of travel, you're a long, long way away from Sydney, and you just went 1 degree off course. So when we go 1 degree off course with our lives, when we shift in the wrong direction, we can end up in a very different place. And in the same way, making a choice today, I'm going to actually live differently. And it's not going to be a Big Bang theory. I'm not going to, boil the ocean. It's how do I just change little things in my life that are going to have big consequences. And those little things can be just how I listen to people around me, how I choose to stop and reflect on what they're saying and not just hear what I want to hear, but how do I listen empathetically and intuitively and in a way that enables me to act differently and to choose differently. So, Jono, your thoughts on that? how often do you find yourself, gosh, I just wasn't listening. Sorry, can you say that again? We get so caught up in where we are, at any point in time, that we forget to listen.
I suppose being self-involved is a thing, because that's what we end up being. We only live with our own eyes and mouth and ears, and we tend to put ourselves first, or worse, always put ourselves second, and don't take time for ourselves. It reminds me of your outro. Take the time to love yourself and the ones you're with.
Exactly.
It's the balance between the two that I suppose matters at the end of the day. So I do feel like it's that constant reflection and self-check that needs to happen to some degree. You can't let yourself go down the rabbit hole of alcoholism and all those things that can ruin your life, and drugs and whatever else, and even just sort of poor thinking. Try and really start to listen to yourself and to say what is it that what's good for me, and what should I do. And I think that's one way to approach it, and find yourself, because I think a lot of people don't know where they are and what they need and what's good for them, and it take time to explore those things and really, really understand yourself. I was very lucky that at a very young age, I knew exactly what I wanted. But that didn't, it doesn't necessarily solve all problems. But I've recently sort of done a lot of deep diving myself, and just found that you got to be kind to yourself at the end of the day as well. Make room to give yourself the benefit of the doubt.
Called being generously selfish.
Yeah.
And what I mean by being generously selfish, the generosity is not about you. It's actually for other people. That as you take care of yourself, as you build into self, as you elevate yourself, as you learn to self-love and to self-respect, so you can do the same for other people. And so, as we come to the end of the show, it's been lovely, Jono, talking to you.
Thank you so much.
And listeners, thank you for listening. Don't forget, if you're not with the ones you love the ones you're with, and take time to love and care yourselves. See you next week.
Cheers. Have a good one.
Cheers, Jono. And signing off from Risky Business